Hello, everyone. I've been involved with advocacy efforts and advocating particularly for the rights of people with disabilities for many, many years, over 20 years actually. I've been a volunteer with the CNIB for over 30 years and a volunteer with the Canadian Council for the Blind. So I see issues that are really important. I feel, as a person with a disability myself, I have vision loss, and I have had for, particularly over 35 years, but when we moved here 35 years ago was when my vision started to deteriorate and I was no longer able to drive. So I have that perspective. I also feel that people with disabilities need to speak out. We need to advocate for change. We need to advocate for things that are going to improve our life. And of course, rail services in the north are one of them. So we need an inclusive, accessible transportation system in northeastern Ontario that includes passenger rail service, the loop. Multimodal transportation is just that, not limited to travel by means of personal vehicles or by bus, on roads or by air. That's not multimodal. That's very limiting. Many people with disabilities, like myself, are not able to drive or may require large electric wheelchairs, which cannot be used when traveling by bus, for example. Most people with disabilities are on fixed incomes and often cannot afford to travel by air. Living in northeastern Ontario, people with disabilities have the following options for travel to medical appointments, for business, for volunteer commitments, or to visit family or friends in other parts of the province. So the first is, from Sault Ste. Marie, for example, to bus services, which don't necessarily connect with other buses or trains, and therefore may require additional accommodation costs. And buses are not necessarily fully accessible. They may be partially accessible. So I'll tell you a couple of stories. First of all, this is only a month ago. I needed to go to Sudbury for a CNIB event, and it was in the afternoon and evening, so I needed to be there prior to 3 p.m. Then the next day, I was traveling by car with the executive director of CNIB in Sudbury to Ottawa. We were attending an event there. This is all in celebration of CNIB's 100th birthday. So talk about complicated travel arrangements. So then we were there in Ottawa for the evening, and the next day we were coming back to Sudbury, and I had to get back home to Sault Ste. Marie. So I thought, okay, there's a new bus service here, Ontario Northland. I'll take the bus to Sudbury. I've done it before. I've taken it Sudbury, I've taken it to Southern Ontario. So I thought, okay. I looked into the schedules. Well, in order to take, I wasn't going to go Greyhound, first of all, because it leaves here at 7 something at night and gets in the middle of the night. So complication right there. So I thought, I'll take Ontario Northland. Well, I looked at the bus schedule. I could not get in to Sudbury in time to go to the event. And I would have had one extra night's accommodation at that end. At the other end, I would not have been able to get home on the same day. I would have had a second night's accommodation in Sudbury. So I ended up flying Bearskin Airlines for the first time from Sault to Sudbury. I didn't even know they had a service from Sault to Sudbury. And that was a very interesting experience. I won't go into a lot of detail, but it was challenging. I must say the pilots were wonderful. They helped me find my seat and helped me find where the seatbelt went in my little tiny seat with cramped legroom. But I did get there in time, and I did manage to get back in good time because Bearskin offered that service. But if I were someone using an electric wheelchair, needless to say, you could not fly Bearskin, and you could not take the bus. So, there are huge issues. That's just a small one. Air travel, as I mentioned before, is costly and can be challenging for many reasons. I have a friend who uses a large electric wheelchair. And quite a few years ago, several of us were going down to Southern Ontario for a special presentation. And She had never flown before. So that was the only way she could get to Toronto. She had a horrendous experience for many, many reasons. And when she got to Pearson Airport, there were a group of us already there waiting to meet her. She was so stressed, she was fit to be tied. And she said, I will never travel by air ever again. So, in other words, she will never travel outside of the north. That's pretty sad. The reality is that Ontario must consider how to plan now for the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities to be prepared for aging baby boomers. That was mentioned earlier. Not all seniors have disabilities, but the vast majority of people with disabilities are seniors. That's statistically proven. And many may not have necessarily identified themselves as having a disability, but they may still have significant health, mobility, or other challenges. And then there are people who are temporarily disabled, such as Jason. The Rick Hansen Foundation has statistics that indicate, and I quote, currently, 1 in 7 people have a disability. In 20 years, that number is expected to grow to 1 in 5, end of quote. The number of people with disabilities in Northern Ontario as of 2016 was approximately 78,350. In 2016, the share of seniors aged 65 and over in regional population was 20.4% in the Northeast. By 2041, the share of seniors in this region is projected to be 31.3%. The federal government released a report in 2017 that recognized the importance of ensuring the Canadian transportation system meets the needs of older adults. The Minister of Transport, on behalf of Transport Canada, asked the Council of Canadian Academies, CCA, to provide an evidence-informed and authoritative assessment on the state of knowledge on the role of technology and innovation in improving the accessibility of the federal transportation system for older adults. The report, titled Older Canadians on the Move, states, and I quote, older adults are a diverse group with unique transportation needs and preferences that are not currently being met by the Canadian transportation system. Adapting this system for an aging population has benefits for all travelers and for the travel industry itself. An inclusive transportation system allows seamless movement between locations and transportation modes. For example, from home to car, to train, to plane, to hotel, so that all people, regardless of background, age, or ability, can easily reach their desired destination from the moment they start planning their journey. An inclusive system supports social equity by providing universal access to transportation and enhances individual well-being. It also creates economic opportunities because more people are able to travel. Demand for an inclusive transportation system will only grow as the proportion of older adults in Canada continues to increase, end of quote. Now, I'll just add that the Canadian Transportation Agency, over the past couple of years, has consulted with various stakeholders across Canada with regards to the accessibility of transportation, and that's under federal jurisdiction. So they have released a report that goes over what they heard from people across Canada. That's going to be incorporated into accessibility legislation that is being developed for Canada. So Canada recognizes accessibility is important in all aspects, including transportation. If the federal government has recognized the need to improve the federal transportation system to ensure that it becomes more accessible, the provincial government in Ontario should also recognize this need. Though provincial transportation isn't dealt with directly under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act regulation, it's more municipal, there's reference to making transportation services accessible for persons with disabilities in the 2016 draft recommendations from the Transportation Standards Development Committee review of the accessibility transportation standards. So these draft recommendations state, and I quote, "Barriers to transportation can significantly affect the lives of people with disabilities, as transportation is an integral part of independent daily activity and involvement in the broader community. The objective of the transportation standards established in 2011 as part of the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act is to remove these barriers, physical, attitudinal, or otherwise, in acting on the long-term objective to, quote, make passenger transportation services under provincial and municipal jurisdiction accessible for persons with disabilities." So I'm hoping in the future that Ontario will take all modes of transportation, including passenger train service, much more seriously, particularly in northeastern Ontario, where transportation options are limited and not terribly accessible for many people with disabilities. And given the fact that the Ontario government has pledged to make Ontario accessible by 2025, not very far away, I believe the government of Ontario has the opportunity at this time to make a difference in the lives of people with disabilities, now and in the future, if they will step up to the plate and make rail transportation a reality all across the Northeast, as envisioned by the proposed Niorn Rail Loop. Thank you.